the worst victims of British rule in India. Prior to British advent, tribal people had lived in inaccessible hinterlands for centuries and had enjoyed the control over local resources, including forest and its produce. Most of the tribal movements had agrarian, religious, political, and economic causes for their emergence. Let us list down some of the common reasons behind the tribal movements in pre-independence era. Major reasons for tribal movement. With the advent of East India Company, the British penetrated into tribal regions. They used forest produce for their business. Trees were cut down for timber. Forest land was used for tea, rubber and coffee cultivation. The expansion of railway network in early 1853 led to tremendous deforestation. The network of roads and rails increased the intrusion of outsiders. In 1793, the British government brought the Permanent Land Revenue Act, which left the tribal at the mercy of zamindars and moneylenders. Under the Act of 1919, the tribal administration was put under reserved subjects and was under the control of provincial governor. Their policy was to keep the tribal community isolated. Whether or not any provincial legislation would be applicable in respect of tribal community depended on the discretion of the governor. Local government officials used tribal labor for their personal and government purpose free of cost. Tribals were restricted from entering into the forest region. Their produce was purchased at a throwaway price. They were not allowed to shift their cultivation. The multi-purpose trees were replaced by commercial plantation. The judiciary system was not clear about the rights of the tribal. In this process, the tribal people reduced to the occupation of subtenant, sharecroppers and agricultural laborers. Against the backdrop of these developments, the tribal movements of 19th century began. At this stage, a number of movements took place which raised protesting voice against the oppressions and exploitation by landlords and British rulers, who in general stood by the side of the landlords. Notable amongst them are the Kherwar movement, 1871 to 1880, the Birsa Munda movement, 1874 to 1901, the Bhil rebellion, 1879, the Sardari movement, 1881 to 1895, the Bastra uprising, 1910, and the Tana Bhagat movement, 1920 to 1935. Friends, let us discuss some of the major tribal movements. The Santal movement. The Santals are the agricultural tribal group who are mainly concentrated in Bihar. The first peasant insurrection took place in 1855-56. The zamindars, moneylender and British officers hiked the land tax and also oppressed and exploited the common peasants. Let us understand some of the main causes of the revolt. There was a combined action of extortion by the zamindars, the police, the revenue and the court. They were abused and dispossessed of their own property. The moneylenders charged exorbitant rates of interest. For the railroad construction, the Europeans employed the Santals, for which they paid nothing to them. The Europeans often abducted Santal women and even murdered them. The non-Santals, that is, Dikus, who resided in this area, got tribal land through some deal and the tribal had to pay rent to the Hindu chiefs. Initially, Santals did not pay much attention to the Dikus, that is, outside the non-Santals, but when their traditional economy began to be shattered, they stood against the administration and the landlords. With the new judicial system, the Santals were reduced to slaves. They started their protest in 1871 under the leadership of two Santal brothers, Sido and Kanhu. Their objective was clearly stated. We should slay all the Dikus and become rulers of ourselves. We should only pay 8 annas for a buffalo plough and 4 annas for a bullock plough, and if the rulers do not agree, we should start fighting. Santals had started to build their own army. The large army, which exceeded about 10,000, assembled and disassembled at a short notice. Though the Santal insurrection was quite strong, it could not succeed against the power of British government, and the revolt was suppressed. Yet, the rebel was a great success, and it gave a message to the whole country to resist the oppressive activities of moneylenders and zamindars. Not only the Santals but also the other agricultural tribes got united. Another tribal movement which gained much popularity amongst the tribals was the Birsa Munda movement. This movement was led by Birsa Munda in the south of Ranchi in the year 1899. Birsa was the son of a sharecropper who received some education from the Christian missionaries. Birsa started a movement in 1893 which aimed to prevent the government from taking over the village wastelands. In 1895, Birsa claimed to possess miraculous healing powers and declared himself as a prophet. He had many followers. He encouraged the Mudras to fight against the superstitions, renounce animal sacrifices, stop taking intoxicant, wear the sacred thread, and to continue the traditional tribal worship. This movement was essentially aimed to eliminate all foreign elements from the Mundra society in order to make it retain its original pure character. A part of religious agenda, Mundra movement was raised to fight against the system of Bet Began, that is, the forced and bonded labor. The tribal became more aware about their rights due to spread of education provided by Christian missionaries. During the similar period, Christian tribal peasants began to lead an offensive against the landlords and the Bet Bigari system through lawsuits. This movement came to be known as Sardari Ladai. The Sardars joined hands with the Birsa in order to get stable ground for the movement. The total picture of the Birsa Mundra's religious movement changed with the Sardari movement. The Sardars wanted elimination of intermediary interests, whereas Birsa was aiming at complete independence, both religious and political. Birsa was arrested in the year 1895 and was imprisoned for 2 years. After returning from jail, Birsa became furious agitator. He held night meetings in which he allegedly advocated killing of zamindars, tikadars, rajas, hakims and Christians. The activists attacked police stations, officials, churches and missionaries. In the year 1900, Birsa was arrested along with 350 Mundras. Birsa died in jail in the same year. Later on, the government attempted to redress the grievances of the Mundras. With the passing of Chota Nagpur Tenancy Act, the Mundra were able to get rid of bonded labor and attain some recognition for their rights on forest resources. The tribal of Chota Nagpur also got legal protection for their land rights. Friends, we can say that tribal movements were the byproduct of extreme exploitation of tribals under British colonial rule, which incidentally also paved the way for massive entry of the Diku, outsiders in the tribal area. In a way, Diku and colonial officials joined hands for subjecting tribal for extreme exploitation. Yet, another movement that is worth noting is that of Tana Bhagat movement. Tana Bhagat is a tribal community in the state of Jharkhand. Tana Bhagats were formed by Oraon saints Jatra Bhagat and Turiya Bhagat. The Tana Bhagats opposed the taxes imposed on them by the British and they staged a Satyagrah movement. The movement actually started in April 1914 when Jatra Bhagat refused excessive demands made by the local police on Oraon tenants for their unpaid labor. Jatra proclaimed that in his vision he had message from God through which he had received revelations for the Oraons. Soon he commanded a huge and enthusiastic following. Those were the days when Oraons were subjected to excessive requisition for labor during the construction of summer residence of the Lieutenant Governor on the Neterhard Plateau. These people were also forced to act as a beater during hunting and as carriers of packages of the local police for a mere pittance. This unjust situation forced Jatra to lead his people so that he may bring them out of the morass. He proclaimed that it was God's order that he and his men should not work as coolies all laborers under zamindars or other non-tribals. He announced that Tana should only adore God and should not worship minor spirit or bhoots. They should give away with animal sacrifice, should lead an ascetic life and give up meat eating, alcoholic drinks and singing, dancing and wearing gaudy dresses. Jatra and his leading disciples were produced before the court, tried and sentenced to imprisonment. But the Tana Bhagats did not allow the movement to die. Rather, the movement spread like a wildfire in the Oraon region. From 1920, most of the Tana Bhagats joined the Indian National Congress and played a prominent part in the non-cooperation movement. In the pre-Gandhian era, Indian nationalists did not take much notice of the problems confronting the tribal community. Only when Mahatma Gandhi appeared as an important figure on the national political scene during the early 1920s did tribal people and their problems come on the national agenda.